Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about, is the microcosmic orbit dangerous? So the microcosmic orbit is a mainstay of the Taoist internal alchemy practices. And the microcosmic orbit really has to do with circulation of the different meridians. It's moving the life force or chi through the different meridians. There are two in particular, one that runs up the front of the body from the perineum, basically up all the way to the tip of the tongue. And the governor vessel, which is the meridian that runs from the top of the palate all the way up to the top of the head, all the way down the back of the body to the perineum. So you have these yin and yang channels, if you will, this circulation. And so a lot of the meridians that branch out in the body, right, which run along the limbs and so on to other places, connect into these two. They're a mainstay in Chinese medicine, documented for thousands of years in their applications, and the microcosmic orbit being a kind of a meditation type of technique of moving the life force or chi through the front and back channels. So that, in essence, is what the microcosmic orbit is. So some people say that the microcosmic orbit is risky or dangerous, and this is just not the case. If anything, it is a much safer type of meditation practice than are things which utilize the chakras. And the reason for this I've explained in other videos, especially when we're talking about Kundalini syndrome or localized problems with chi, life force, or prana being stuck in certain areas, particularly the areas around the head. And in a yogic tradition that utilizes the chakras, so the points along the spine, they often talk about as being these padmas or lotuses or wheels, right? These energy centers. And the idea with yogic, many kind of yogic practices is to focus on the chakras and to do certain things with them, right? It might be to increase the energy flow. It might be, there are many different kind of practices. Kriya Yoga utilizes the chakras with Om Japa when you're doing Kriya Pranayama. And so that yogic practices, if they're done in moderation, can be effective, but they're more likely to actually create problems where you're localizing the chi or life force or prana in certain areas, particularly the upper centers around the head. And the classic example of problems in this regard are what we call Kundalini syndrome, where people are activating the life force in the lower centers, getting it to go up the spine and then get localized or trapped in the upper centers. That can create a whole host of things, from at the very minimal level being spaced out and not connected, not feeling grounded, right, to people having like really bad headaches and starting to have some health issues, right? So that Kundalini syndrome really comes from the yogic, can be a byproduct of the yogic practices. But with the microcosmic orbit, what you're actually doing is not leaving the life force in the upper centers, you're circulating it down the front of the body and then up the back, or conversely, up the front and down the back. And what happens when you start to circulate the life force through that loop? This microcosmic orbit becomes a unified chakra, if you will. Chakra means wheel in Sanskrit. So the idea in chakras is you had energy centers, say in your throat, right, that were responsible for bringing in energy from your environment, connecting into different parts of your energetic anatomy and so on, right? And then these yogic practices localizing that energy or life force. And what I've experienced myself, and a lot of people have experienced that, is that when you focus on the chakras, you really, the life force tends to stay there and it doesn't circulate. And the advantage of the microcosmic orbit is that you're moving it in this loop. You're circulating the chi, the life force, and it starts to balance the front and back meridians. And so the back meridian, we often call the fire channel. It has this more sort of expansive of the classic idea about, the energy going up the spine. That is the fire path in the back. But what we need to do to balance that flow upwards is to engage the front path, right, which we call the water path, to circulate the energy downwards. And you get into this convection current, if you will, and kind of an energetic convection current, where the chi, the life force, is flowing in this loop that balances things all along the path. And that is the advantage of the microcosmic orbit from sort of a perspective of balancing your energy. Now, there are deeper aspects to that. That is really the tip of the iceberg in Taoist internal alchemy, because we get into much, much deeper levels about the energetic anatomy, about moving the life force, the chi, through different pathways, right? So the front and back channel are really only 2 of the 8 extraordinary vessels, which are deeper energetic channels within. But the chakra model only deals with localized things along the spine, and that's why, from my perspective, that it's more problematic than the microcosmic orbit. Now, there are some Taoist practitioners, people who do Taoist internal alchemy, or at least some kind of Taoist practice, that talk about the microcosmic orbit as needing to open it up, right? And like, you've got blockages and it's dangerous and it's a treacherous path. This is just not the case. A lot of people bring their own kind of cultural baggage, their own ideas about the energetic orbit, the microcosmic orbit, and they say, oh, you need to do certain things, prerequisites, to be able to move the life force, up and down. But it's not the case. The most important thing with the microcosmic orbit is that you take the tip of your tongue and put it on the roof of your mouth, your hard palate. When you connect the tip of the tongue with the hard palate, you're connecting the loop, so you start to get this flow of the life force naturally. So you can try it yourself without actually doing the microcosmic orbit meditation, is just connect your tongue to your palate and just open yourself up and be aware. You start to feel that there's this subtle flow of the life force that starts to happen. So that is one of the, kind of the secrets of Taoist internal alchemy, if you will. And the other thing about the microcosmic orbit is why it has an advantage over yogic type of spinal, breathing pranayama practices, is that it grounds you in the body, right? In yogic practices where you're trying to bring the life force up the spine, get into the upper centers, and then have this expansion of consciousness, you're lifting off and then you're just floating away, right? So you're not grounding the energy and bringing it back. In the microcosmic orbit, because you're bringing it up and down again, circulating it around, you're grounding your spiritual experience, your spiritual transformation in the body itself. And normally what we do at the end of a microcosmic orbit practice, the meditation, is that we bring the energy down into the abdomen area to store it, right? So it's a safe place to store it. And then it can help to increase one's health, longevity, and also use it as a fuel for internal transformation with deeper levels of practice. But when you're doing yogic practices that just bring the life force up to the medulla or to the crown or the ajna, all that kind of thing, you're just leaving it somewhere where it cannot be stabilized. It just spaces you out. And we've seen, like, for instance, with Gopi Krishna, and he was the first one to kind of talk about his Kundalini experiences and Kundalini syndrome, right? Where he got so spaced out from bringing the life force up the spine and leaving it in the crown area that he was basically non-functional for many years, right? He couldn't interact and be practical in life because he was so spaced out, and he started experiencing health problems, etc. So that is really the byproduct of an excessive type of spinal breathing pranayama, or excessive type of yogic practice, leaving the energy in the upper centers. You don't want to do that. You can bring it up to get an expansion of awareness and so on, but then you want to bring it back down, right? And that's why we use the front path, and then bring it into the abdomen area, store it there, condense it, use it. So we call that the golden elixir, right? That's one of the ways that we start to help to fuel our internal transformation, our internal change, taking steps towards this sort of enlightenment, right? This enlightenment as a process of internal transformation. If anything, it can help to remediate some of the challenges that you have when you're doing excessive fire kind of path up the spine, and just the microcosmic orbit will balance it, and then it grounds it in the body. And that's what you want, because you want to be functional. You want to increase your health, you want to increase your energy level, you want expansion of consciousness, you want internal transformation, change, realization, whatever you call it, right? And you want, you want your life to be practical, right? So that's what the microcosmic orbit will assist with. And so it is a very effective practice. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.